It's a very basic and humble beginning. I answered an advert in the newspaper for a head chef job here. It had been running for 1.5 years before I started. And so my inspiration for the place was really kind of more out of a survival instinct. You know, I had a 6-month-old child, we couldn't pay the bills, and I was 27 years old and had to become a head chef because of those circumstances, you know. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that early struggle raising kids and trying to manage finances. And so realistically, it wasn't not a romantic start here, it's just literally out of life's necessity. When I did start, the business was not doing very well at all. It had been going for 1.5 years, and it wasn't a restaurant that people liked very much, in particular. And I felt quite a lot of pressure to do something about it and to really change that mindset. I also dually had a really strong creative urge that I didn't fully understand because I was a 27-year-old. And that was probably the thing that helped us stick around in those early years, when I was an employee. A lot of the early years are kind of a blur. So this is our 20th year, and in August, Attica would have been under my tenureship for 20 years, the first decade as an employee and the last decade as the owner. And I suppose like that first 5 to 10 years really felt like a total blur, like I was in a tunnel, like we're just trying to do anything we could to survive, and we're using creativity as the main answer to all the problems, and we're just trying to develop our own personal style and culture here, and that takes time for a cook, as they shed their significant mentors. I mean, the restaurant is vastly different than it was 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even 2 years ago. This place has a forward momentum of constant evolution. We kill our darlings every day in terms of the dishes that we create. They have a life course, and when they're done, they come off the menu and they never come back on again. And because of that, it always kind of keeps us looking forward to what we want to be and what we want to say on the plate and what we think is delicious and what we think people would like, but certainly creatively, whatever our inspirations are. It's easy to look back on it and go, you know, we had no supporters in the early years, which is only partly true. There was some really amazing people who came in and said things that were so kind and so helpful. And without those thoughtful words, we probably wouldn't have made it. But I would say it was a pretty solid 5 years before the bulk of people started to change their perceptions or found out about the restaurant. And I would say sort of probably 10 years, it was sort of solidifying itself as a restaurant with serious intentions, I suppose. During the lockdowns and COVID, up until that point, you know, we always had felt tremendous sense of community support, but then we had to close down, and it felt certain that we would lose everything. I was pretty sure that the company would go broke, and I don't come from money, and I don't have a backup plan. This is it. And so it was terrifying. And the community of Melbourne supported the restaurant in that 2 years, like solely. Attica had always had a reasonably big international clientele. And so that went overnight, of course, and so did the interstate support. And then we were just in Melbourne, and the people of Melbourne really turned up for us. And I think that's because we'd always been community-minded and engaged with our community. But there were certainly many moments of self-doubt, and in every moment of doubt, you know, people ordered lasagna, people wrote to us expressing gratitude. We met people in our bake shop, we met people in our pop-up restaurant in the Yarra Valley, you know, so there was just an incredible sort of sense of goodwill. And it was something that I've told myself that I'm never going to forget. You know, it changed me forever. I think Ripponlea is like a very unique community. It's obviously more like a small village where most people know each other. It's super interconnected. I think people are super respectful of one another here. I feel like that I've always got friends here, and that's been a really cool thing. Like certainly back in 2005 when we started, it wasn't as bustling as it is now. You know, it was kind of joke that was kind of tumbleweeds coming down the street a little bit. There weren't, I think there was one cafe maybe, now there's 3 or 4. I've always liked that that people are respectful, but they'll also let you do your work and don't get involved too much, if that makes sense. And that's important. And I've just always felt very welcome here, I guess. And you know, I've chosen to live here and run this company here for so long. Well, that was just an answer to a problem, and the problem was we were going to go broke and we had to do something. We were coming out of a lockdown and the public was going to be allowed to return to outdoor dining, and Attica has almost no outdoor dining options. The footpath wasn't going to cut it. And we were in Chadstone and I saw an enormous line of people lining up for Kmart, like hundreds, and we walked past Gucci, and Gucci had nobody in it and no line. Both businesses were open. It was this kind of weird little moment. And just by seeing both of those scenes, I knew kind of where we sat and I knew where we needed to be. And we made the plan to, in the summer, to open a restaurant that was much larger, a much lower price, and was almost completely outdoors. And that was like a wild and super fun time. So it's just a solution to a problem. I tend to think that problems should be normalized and seen as things to just overcome rather than insurmountable. And so yeah, our problem was we couldn't really do any numbers here because of the restrictions. We need to find a solution. When we talk about native foods, these are ingredients that kind of belong to people, and there's culture and story and cooking that's attached to them. And so that's really interesting as a cook, and a really massive source of inspiration, because we are living in a country with the world's oldest food, and that's a beautiful thing. And so I've had a small window into that through relationships and community, but we tread carefully. And I feel like, you know, there's around 5,000 to 6,000 native foods in Australia. We have really barely eaten any of them. Even Attica and our team, who are heavily involved in this industry, most people have probably only tried 5 or 6. We've probably only tried 500 of those foods. And so really the potential for inspiration is endless, but we try to do it responsibly. I don't really have favorite dishes. Probably my favorite dish is the dish that's not on the menu, that's in development. So at any one time, there might be up to 6 different dishes being developed and created behind the scenes. You know, we've had, in my whole life, I've had a real love affair with lasagna, and it's something that came into my family as a small child, and it became our family's culture and the way that we celebrated every special occasion, from birthdays to Christmas Day. No matter how hot it was, we'd make lasagna. My mother started that. I took that on and evolved it. We made lasagna to survive during the pandemic. We sold 17,500 lasagnas. And I wrote 10,000 words on lasagna and bolognese in my new book, Uses for Obsession. We put lasagna on the menu after having a rule that is no pasta here. And so recently, after taking the Attica lasagna dish off the menu and having some space from it, I've come back and created another version of lasagna, which is really just about the crispy top of the lasagna. And so that was what I was working on yesterday. So that's probably, like, if I had a favorite dish, that would be it. It would be this thing that I'm working on that I'm excited to share with people, that I think is going to bring joy to them. Well, that's actually a New Zealand painting. Yeah, that's by Ruben Patterson, Te Reo Maori artist, incredible artist. And so there's a variety of art. It's not dogmatically Australian. Sometimes right now there's 2 New Zealand paintings in the restaurant. There's a painting behind you from a painter in Ocean Grove. There's a painter from New York City to your left. So it's really a wide variety of art, but art is crucial in not only in the experience of experiencing Attica as a customer, but certainly as the co-owner of the restaurant, and as somebody who's creative, because the art that you see is generally linked to the restaurant in some more meaningful way than just a painting on the wall. Often these people are personal friends, and we have collaborated on projects, and so there's an entire experience out the back, a whole installation built by very, very famous artists from Los Angeles called Dabs Myler. Art informs everything here, you know. Art is the restaurant, is part of the restaurant. The restaurant is creating art. We're heavily involved in the art community, and the restaurant has a collection of art that changes annually as well in the dining room. So it's important that I think that the art, you know, speaks to something about the restaurant and informs the work of the restaurant, but also that it's a place for our staff to enjoy as well, and for our guests to come in and, you know, feel like on some level that you're in a small gallery. Probably the number one thing that I think of here when I think of Attica in mid-century are the chairs. And the chairs are designed by Grant Featherston in 1961. They're the Scape dining chair. They're an Australian chair, and they were remade under license from the Featherstons by Grazia Materia and by Grazia and Co. For the restaurant at a great cost, and they're very, very special. They're a forever chair. So it's specifically re-engineered for the customer to be able to sit 3 hours in, and also because they're a really important part of our culture and history in Melbourne. This is a design from here of which we should be so proud. I feel like, in terms of our home, Kylie and I very much feel like we're the custodians of this special house and this very special thing, which is like a work of art. And it's our responsibility to protect this home for future generations so that this home will always be around. And so, you know, that's a cool thing to live in. You live in a living and breathing work of art. And, you know, in terms of houses, you know, the mid-century architects were incredible at bringing kind of the outside in. So the way that the light passes through our home, the way that you sit on the sofa and view the Four Seasons, and the way that the house makes people who visit feel, and you don't have to be an architecture buff to be affected by our house. You know, it could be an Amazon delivery driver just coming in and going, oh, wow, this house makes me feel good. You know, sadly, we don't see as much of that these days. You know, in the 50s and 60s, it was kind of like the peak of people engaging with architects to build homes, and not always at high costs. Many of these architects are working to keep costs down and to solve problems. And today we find ourselves in a different situation where not enough of us are actually choosing great architects to design our homes. And I think that's, you know, something that we've lost a little bit, and hopefully we can find back. We should support architects, we should engage architects if we can afford to. Well, I guess, you know, from the little that I know about Dr. Ernest Fooks, he is just this really hyper-intelligent man who's like a scholar and who did a variety of things, from, you know, qualifying very early as an architect in Vienna and as a town planner, to moving here in 1939 and facing anti-Semitism and having to overcome that, and then building his own successful architecture practice, to becoming really the preeminent, you know, Jewish architect or architect of our time. I still don't think he gets his just desserts. You know, I think he's still to this day very underrated, and yet he built about and designed about 400 buildings. So he's a really, really significant Australian architect. I think he was just a really deep thinker, and I understand this because of my study on the guy and my admiration for the houses that he built in our area. And they just have a sense of a person who knows themselves creatively. Like, there's a maturity about them, and they are inherently beautiful. They have unique features. The use of timber and natural materials and influences from Japan is evident in these houses. He was a person who traveled, and so I guess, like, in a sense, they were some of the best well-rounded, but certainly one thing that people coming out of Europe in the 1930s and 40s brought was this really knowing sense of quality and what quality is. And so when you go into a house that was designed by Ernest Fooks, you're not only looking at the design, but you're looking at the attention to detail that he paid to making sure that every single person that worked on that job, from the builder to the cabinet maker to the person installing the toilet, was on a high level. And so I think that's really the definition of an artist or a great architect, is that not only do they design something, but they also have the context, the friends and the collaborators to see it be fully realised.
How do you find living in southeast Melbourne?
Well, clearly I think it's the greatest. You know, that's pretty obvious. And I've always lived here from the time that I moved to Australia in 2002 as a 25-year-old. I think the green spaces, the proximity to the beach. I also love my neighbourhood. I've got the best neighbours imaginable. I've never lived in such a tremendously kind and engaged neighbourhood. I just think that everything is connected, you know, that all creative endeavours are connected, they all have similarities. And often people, you know, even people in business who don't see themselves as creative are highly creative. And I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between people who see themselves creating art, somebody like me, and somebody who, you know, is working in an accountancy firm and thinks that they don't have a lot of creativity. But I would say that some of the greatest creativity that I've seen, you know, could be in accountancy, could be in problem solving. And so I think creativity is just a mechanism to overcome things and to solve problems. And so I think that creativity is fascinating in all walks of life, and that all humans have that ability to create and make things. And we shouldn't lose sight of that.